it feels, or it has felt to me over the past year, particularly towards the beginning of this year, that there was a concerted effort or coordinated effort to target crypto. Do you guys agree? Like, as you know, as an outsider, that's what it felt like to me. Do you guys agree, or do you think that it's just the confluence, a coincidental confluence of multiple things coming together?
So we were just talking about this a little bit during the break, but one thing I think was sort of notable is the collapse of FTX, and at least especially in U.S. policy, but some other elsewhere, where Sam Bankman-Fried had been presenting himself as like the trustworthy guy that was in tight with politicians, and then the whole thing collapsed, and I think it made a number of politicians feel burned, and also when a major event happens in the news that there's a terrible thing, and policymakers feel the urge, especially legislatures, to do something about that.
Like a knee-jerk reaction.
I mean, sure. I mean, I think there is a knee-jerk reaction when everything happens to do something. Though this was, you know, it was a pretty big scale too. And the challenge is that or maybe this is a bit cynical, but sometimes doing something is more important than doing something well. And like a number of the proposals that had come out, especially close to sort of the wake of that event, have done nothing to actually stop the event. So one example was Senator Warren proposed a bill back in December that went after wallets, unhosted wallets. If people had unhosted wallets instead of using FTX, then they would not have lost their money in FTX, right? So it's actually the opposite of what would have helped people have avoided that situation, but it was an opportunity. And it may be knee-jerk, but it's also sometimes where people have something that they've wanted to do for a while, but need the political moment to bring it forward.
I agree. I believe that the FTX debacle really has defined the year of policy since we last met at Zcon4. And you know, it's just given policymakers and regulators who really don't like crypto anyway all the cover they need to attack, and they have. They've gone full on, and it, especially with the SEC and all the actions that they've brought. Yeah, and it's really not a surprise at all, because for them, for these people, it's a politically popular thing to do, or it's a way to gain political power. And I think they're taking full advantage of it. I do believe that we're kind of on the tail end of that, at least I'm hoping, and you know, pending not another crisis in crypto. And I think that is this process recently that we went through on the Hill with these markups is a reflection of that, is that we're getting some things moving that are positive. Even though, like Senator Warren, I think has specifically said that if the Keep Your Coins Act or the Blockchain Regulatory Certainty Act does get to the Senate, there's no way it's moving through that part of the Congress. So there's, yeah, these are going to be roadblocks that are going to be there for quite a long time.
Yeah. When I was at ECC, a lot of the engagement was at a sort of a different level. We weren't really talking so much with representatives and their staffers. We were going to FATF, and we were talking to law enforcement organizations and whatnot. Is that indicative of a shift in where the center of gravity with regards to policy is being made, or is it just that I wasn't talking to the right people?
I think it is a shift. Yeah, I think that it signals that some of those regulatory agencies who were some of the first to look at crypto in a really serious way have come to their positions. They've published their positions and their guidance. It still is evolving, so there's still a need to engage with them. But in a way, they are now somewhat sophisticated when it comes to crypto. So that I think their positions are somewhat established, and that's something that industry has been building on. So now we're just moving to the next stage of fixing the problem of a policy and legislative ecosystem that just doesn't fit with crypto, and hopefully that will be the focus. And once that gets addressed, then perhaps it goes even back to those groups again for an adjustment, now that it's based on maybe a new framework for how these things are treated in the legislative world.
Okay. Some of those conversations that I had with folks at places like the Department of Justice, it was very clear that they felt like they had a vocation, that they were on a mission to prevent the funding of something like another 9/11. And that was what really motivated them. They were very, very strongly motivated. And obviously now there's this whole financial component, and there's the SEC component. But one thing that always seems to be missing is that aspect of privacy. And why do you think that is? Or is it there, but it's just not getting enough volume?
Well, there are a lot of people in policy-making positions in legislatures and such who will admit that there is a value to privacy, that this is something that is good, but it's more about, and it has to be balanced. The trade-offs that people are willing to make in order to do that balancing are often very skewed to a notion of increased enforcement. Like, say if cash hadn't existed for millennia, they probably wouldn't like to have cash be introduced. We have, and this is sort of a common thing that has happened in a variety of different technologies, is that there's 100 years ago, every transaction except for the very largest ones was basically done on a cash basis. It was very common, and if you're at the upper class, you might be moving around larger sums, but it was mostly small and with all sorts of strong privacy. And you didn't have a driver's license because cars didn't exist, and so on. You had anonymity, you had a bunch of these features, and society was able to move on, and we had for a time a thing called payphones, where you could make an anonymous phone call with cash in your pocket, and society was able to deal with that. But as these technologies get developed, there is a notion from a lot of people in the enforcement end, whose job it is to enforce things, to say, okay, the surveillance benefits to them of this technology should be the strongest ones, and that basically that the privacy that we used to have, in some of their views, was a mistake. And part of this is because everybody trusts themselves to do the right thing. They think they'll use these powers wisely. But then the reality is that many of these powers will be misused. And if you think your government is the bestest one in the whole world that will never misuse these powers, well, then that very law might be copied by one you don't trust. Or maybe there'll be a political change in your regime, and then all of a sudden these tremendous investigative powers will be available to one doesn't. So for good civic hygiene, we need to bring back the privacy and make people not just say, yeah, privacy is important, but understand that privacy is a fundamental thing that we have to have, and that it can't be just traded away for greater law enforcement.
A good mission statement. We're actually seeing some of that play out currently in the UK, where there has for a long time been pressure from certain aspects of the powers that be over there, led by the security services, to impose greater requirements on companies to enable surveillance of, and for example, end-to-end encrypted comms and whatnot.
Yeah.
And now we're seeing big companies like Apple, Signal have done it as well. And they're going up and they're saying, I think Signal have said, we'll just exit the UK if you guys decide to do this. Apple have come out with a very strongly worded statement. We're starting to see real pushback. Where do you think our natural allies are in this? Because there's sometimes when we have those conversations, I think Zcash is seen as being a little bit left field, maybe a little bit anarchistic, a little bit cyberpunk, maybe not quite, in line with the more conventional looking world that crypto has moved towards, as for example, we've had futures listed on Chicago and exchanges and whatnot. So where do you think are natural allies there? Are those folks who are wearing the suits still closely allied with Zcash, or do they have their own divergent interests?
Those suits, those individuals wearing the suits, which ones are those? Okay, let me just talk about the allies that I see, the natural allies. I believe that organizations like EFF, maybe this is not a surprise to anyone here, but Internet Society, ACLU, thank you, Jay, for being here, EPIC, these are groups that I think are very natural allies. But there's more than that too. There's research centers, like the research center I work with at Georgetown University, and they help host the PGP for Crypto Breakfast series. It's one thing I didn't have enough time to cover in my presentation, I'll just take a moment to say here, is that now that resources are so limited, and there might have been a time where maybe ECC could help directly fund some think tanks or others who are natural allies who already believe in our mission. They just need a little help and resources to execute on it. We can't do that at this point, or maybe not in the future as we pare down and focus and continue to decentralize. What is desperately needed is some funding from our ecosystem for those groups. And I understand that's hard because you're not going to get groups like that to go out and push specifically Zcash. But they're going to talk about privacy, they're going to talk about self-custody, they're going to talk about all the things we care about, and they might mention Zcash. It would be a very good use of community grants to support some of these organizations. It is something that I have been thinking about as a personal goal, is to tell those groups about the possibility and to perhaps help them get something proposed and submitted. Because I think that as much as these allies, who are natural allies, want to work with us, they have limited bandwidth, they have limited resources, and just like everything else, they need some resources to do the work that we would hope they would do. And if there's a specific thing they propose to do that the community could get behind, I think that would be fantastic.
We had huge success, I think, with the RAND Corporation engagements, where we asked them to look specifically at the question of whether Zcash was being used for illicit purposes, and they came back with a really useful report that was very powerful when it came to being shared, broadly with policymakers and legislators, and even law enforcement folks who are like, oh wow, I never realized.
If I can add a little bit more, some of it is a little bit soft. So, for instance, the work that I do with Georgetown University and the CyberSMART Research Center there, that's a multi-university industry university research center. So it's a collaborative research center, as they call it. But through that center, I am able to engage with very high-level policymakers from different countries around the world who are members of that. And in general, somebody, I hate to go off topic here a little bit, but somebody had put a question in about, like, how is Zcash viewed generally by policymakers and on the Hill? And I think we are actually viewed very positively. And I know you might not feel that, but I think it is absolutely true, compared to especially some other coins that have privacy features who don't engage. We are respected. I think policymakers and even the Enforcement Bureau of the SEC or OFAC, I think they understand that we stand for values, and we're trying to progress research, and we're trying to help create a free society. And because of that, I think that they are, this is my hunch, I believe that they're reticent to directly attack our ecosystem. They could have done it, right? It would have been easy to do. I think that because of our engagement with research community, and our presence in DC and all the things we do to be a stand-up citizen, a global citizen in this case, we're all over the place, that really changes the way policymakers and regulators look at us. And I think it gives us a special opportunity to help shape the environment and the policy and regulatory world.
I used to call it the hearts and minds approach. I think it seems to have worked very well and has been further turbocharged with you and Gary coming on board, having the sort of level of experience and background that you have. Kurt, you've got a different aspect on, or a different set of experiences. Where do you think our natural allies lie in these fights?
Well, one of the things you're mentioning is both Signal and Apple, like being willing to leave a business opportunity behind. And I mean, Signal is a nonprofit, but Apple is very much a for-profit in order to protect privacy, to fight back against it. And so first of all, I think a natural ally in the industry world, and it's not just Signal and Apple, though they're prominent, is the people in the work in encryption for messaging. A lot of the same sort of issues and principles, and getting the hearts and minds, getting people behind things of why encryption is good, is from a daily use thing, having encrypted messages, and they are natural allies to push back against some of the laws that will try to backdoor things, which might be sort of a similar attempt to try and get at breaking financial privacy. In terms of whether it is a natural ally, well, I mean, like, Apple has made it a part of its business message that they're the privacy and security people. And so long as that continues to be their sort of differentiator and market advantage, then they will continue to do that. But it's like, if you're having like a tiger as a friend, is that like they may be soft and cuddly and all those things, but it can also turn on you. As I understand it, they have very strict rules about cryptocurrency-related applications appearing in their app store. So it's not like they are 100% allies on every possible thing, but on the issue of privacy for their own business interests and differentiating themselves from Facebook and other things, they are a strong policy advocate for privacy and for the sanctity of encryption. So they are an ally, at least until that changes.
I just decided to look up, and I can read you a little quote here. Apple has said that planned changes to British surveillance laws could affect iPhone users' privacy by forcing it to withdraw security features, which could ultimately lead to the closure of services such as FaceTime and iMessage in the UK. And that was in response to a consultation by the UK government on proposed changes to UK surveillance. But just to go back to the challenges that we as a community face. We've talked a lot about the US, and I'd like to talk a little bit more about the more global aspect. You talked a little bit about that. Paul, starting with you, obviously you're US focused. To what extent do US policymakers look to coordinate with places like the UK, allies, or through organizations like FATF? I know that they obviously take part in these organizations like FATF and seek to influence, through whatever policy goals the individuals who are organizations who are there present in the room are pushing. But do you think that's a major factor, or do you think that the US is really its own little microcosm, and the rest of the world is a little bit separate and different?
I wouldn't say the US is necessarily separate or a microcosm. First, just to say this is not exactly my specialty, because Gary would have been perfect for this question. I wish he were here, Gary Weinstein. But I would say that the US values very much, this is my perception, being able to drive international bodies like FATF and have possibly ultimate control over the outputs of those types of organizations. So I think that they have a very big influence. Again, just my perception. I haven't been too involved with FATF. I would say that what has affected U.S. policy is the progress in the UK and or in the EU, with having both actually, but it's slightly different. But in the EU with MiCA moving forward, and that having gotten so much positive attention and suggesting that someone else is ahead. Policymakers in the U.S. really don't like to think they're behind, and this has, I think, a little bit of drive behind the process and moving things just a little bit quicker. I think, however, there's a lot of good thinking by some policymakers to not necessarily follow that path and come up with something a little different, which I think is the right call for the U.S.
So yeah, on one important difference, I think, is if you're looking as between the EU and the United States, is they have very different perspectives on privacy. In the EU, they have some of the sort of the stronger and I guess first to market in the sense of data protection laws, which are designed to have the government protect the citizen against the corporations. In the U.S., for a lot of our legal tradition with the Fourth Amendment, a number of rules are about protecting citizens against the government, which I appreciate, though oftentimes there are policymakers who push up against those limits in different ways. So there are different approaches. So too often in the EU on privacy issues, they will have a strong privacy law, and then they will have exceptions in easing the path for law enforcement access. And I think a lot of U.S. policymakers wouldn't mind having that, but at least they will come up against like Fourth Amendment issues if they do so. So this gives some opportunities, for the differences between them. I appreciate what Paul was showing in his talk earlier, the video you showed about talking about, don't want to have these other jurisdictions get ahead, get some competition between various jurisdictions to provide the best environment. And how much do they look to each other? I think they communicate quite a bit, and they have different perspectives on it, but certainly within sort of the Western European and United States, there's a lot of cooperation and discussion, but there is quite a bit of the rest of the world, and especially with cryptocurrencies being used all over the world, there are wide variety of countries have different perspectives out there, and that's also a place where we want to say, I like your term there, I like the hearts and minds, try and get the hearts and minds of people all around so they're supporting it and they are making it as a privacy as a principle and bringing it into the blockchain space at some of these smaller jurisdictions who then might put out there, okay, we have a friendlier environment, we are going to protect these rights, have a principled basis for doing it, so not just like, we're going to be the harboring for criminals, but rather we respect the value of privacy and want to integrate it in line with international human rights standards and get that as sort of a counter message to some of the, we need to, prevent the next 9/11, or these days a lot of it is shifting over to protect the children, but it is, which is a very important thing. We do want to protect the children, but we have to look at these things rationally and try what is the best way of doing that, and is removing privacy the best way to do it? Oftentimes, no.
In your engagement on the Hill, have there been times when you've realized or become aware that there are differences between the broader crypto ecosystem and Zcash? And let's face it, we're all talking about the privacy or anonymity enhancing aspects, as they're often dubbed, that potentially put us more at risk of Zcash becoming disadvantaged? Or do you think that they just all perceive it as being all in the one bucket, so to speak?
It's a great question. I do think there's certainly a difference. I think we are perceived as a subcategory of our own, or a very small subcategory in some ways. However, I think that the values that we stand for as a fork of Bitcoin and even adding privacy to that are very much shared by the associations, by the Blockchain Association, by others in the industry, by DeFi Education Fund. So I don't feel that we are disadvantaged because we're viewed as a separate category. So I think I think we're somewhat separate because we do have a very special place in the ecosystem and we have a unique history. But I think that we have very strong champions who realize that privacy is necessary in all of the other projects as well. The dilemma at times is just a matter of priority, because they might have other priorities that they need to focus on before, that they perceive as even a bigger threat than the loss of privacy. So there's that to wrestle with when you're dealing with a trade association or others that have many constituents asking for different things. But when it comes down to any crisis moment, I believe, and I'm actually quite confident, that the organizations that we work with are going to step up and help defend privacy. I'm very confident about that because they are just, I know these people very well. I work with them almost on a daily basis, and they are just true crypto believers, and they share our values.
And Jay from ACLU is here, and I was about to mention him. But Kurt, in the broader set of organizations like EFF and ACLU who have an interest in privacy, to what extent do they perceive the challenges that we face as being part of the broader battle for privacy? Or do they kind of say, well, that cryptocurrency thing is something separate, and we don't need to,
Well, I think there is a challenge for a number of civil society organizations where they have a fair amount of crypto skepticism. And this has come from seeing things in the news of some of the more scandalous. I mean, this is another way in which the FTX collapse has hurt in the battle for hearts and minds, as kind of a colored perception where sometimes the news of some debacle overwhelms some of the advantages and how as we're in this space, I know plenty of people who I absolutely are true believers. They're trying to do it for principled reasons, trying to make the world a better place with this technology, but getting that message through and say, what is it? So you talk about with these organizations, what are the fundamental rights at stake? Why does it matter? So you talked about it a little bit earlier, the code is speech, the First Amendment protections for code. That's something that when I was at EFF, I did a lot of work on, trying to make the world safe for a number of things, but especially encryption, which is under attack there. And that principle comes into play just as much if there is a law saying that this kind of software is cannot be published, cannot be put out there. This came up in the Tornado Cash situation where there was a question of, and a reaction where it was removed from GitHub. When I was representing EFF, I was working at EFF, we represented Matt Green, who I think many people in this community know, for putting the code back and basically kind of daring them to come after and say, no, that actually is unlawful to publish this code. It would have been fun to do that case because Matt would be a great client and it would really crystallize the issue, but they're not idiots and they didn't, take the bait. But nevertheless, that was helping reinforce that and sending a message to everybody else there that you can still work in this code space. So when working with these organizations that have strong privacy missions or free expression missions, part of it is just making sure that you're explaining it, how does this affect all of our rights? And because many of the regulations that would come after Zcash or other cryptocurrency projects have repercussions through lots of other things. And while I was looking at, for example, my talk was talking about Article 93, thankfully that has been eliminated, but it was talking about something that is fundamentally wrong from a due process and privacy standard, which is if somebody at a very low standard is suspected, then you can investigate their family members. And that is it goes against some fundamental notions of what due process is, fundamental notions of how do you protect your civil liberties in the world. And it was coming up in this context, for financial institutions as well as anyone related to doing cryptocurrency, but it is still hitting on what is a fundamental right that can you be subject to sort of this invasive investigation at a standard when you yourself are not accused of even being possibly involved. It is your brother or your sister or whatnot who is possibly involved, right? This hits on those fundamental rights, and those fundamental rights resonate with a lot of the civil society organizations, regardless of whether it is in one space or a different space.
Maybe I can add a little bit more, Jack, because what you made me think about is, okay, so what I was really referring to are our strong allies. But when you step out a little bit further to our natural allies, some of the civil society and other groups, I do think there's a distinction there. And I think that that's one of the reasons why I want to make sure that we are having stronger engagement and perhaps funding relationships or other relationships as a community with them. And I'm not talking about EFF and ACLU here. I think they're more enlightened and they're more sophisticated on knowing about crypto. But other organizations that I think truly should be supporters of crypto and specifically Zcash are like the Internet Society, where I used to work. And they run Global Encryption Day. They're kind of the power behind that. And they're well known for being supporters of the internet with deep roots into internet standards. And I think it is just remarkable to me that, and I've talked to them, their friends, some of the people there, that they just don't understand crypto. And it's just not really on their radar, personally. You know, like they're core internet people, and that's all they really care about. So to me, it's like just a lost opportunity, because I think that if there were enough resources put forward to bring them into the camp, they would be incredibly powerful allies, because they have such deep roots in how the internet works, and they were there for the early days of the internet. And this was expressed when we've had these technologist letters that have come out over the last year or so, talking about how crypto is so bad, and it just boggles my mind. It just floors me. And some of these people that I deeply respect have said things that are so bad about crypto, and I can't believe there's such a disconnect. So it is my hope that some of these bridges can be built so that we have what I do think are natural allies actually on our side, instead of some of them, not all, but some of them breaking off and writing very critical letters, which is such a disappointment.
I think just to add on to that, I think a very important thing is having people in the policymaking space, whether they are civil society or allies there or policymakers themselves, understand the technology. Which taken from that, even if you're going to disagree on a policy point of view, if the other person at least understands what they're talking about, and that enables you also to make the distinction that there's this broad brush that everything crypto is just like each other, is just one space, and of course there's lots of different things there. It is a technology that can be used for a wide variety of things. How does it work? Why does it matter? And getting sort of a educated view on this. You may still have some policy disagreements about where things go with that, but at least they're on the basis of what's actually happening. And I think it's always going to be better policy, even with disagreements, if it's done on the basis of how the technology is working, as opposed to some idea that people have had from reading a few news articles and things like that.
Yeah, what both of you just said, kind of reminds me of the importance of educating people about exactly what this technology is, what it means, what the words mean. Like even the concept of an unhosted wallet. It's a wallet. Calling it an unhosted wallet implies that there's something different about it. It's just a wallet. It's like having it's like calling the physical wallet that's in your back pocket an unhosted bank account. Well, actually, no, it's not.
Self-hosted is where we tried to go with that, but yes.
Yeah, I mean, terminology issues, though one thing I think is a little bit of, so from time to time bills have been proposed about privacy coins and such, and they use the term anonymity anonymity enhanced, right? And I actually love that they are admitting by that phrase that it's an enhancement. It actually, is something that makes it enhanced to have anonymity, which I agree that is an enhancement. It makes things better to have anonymity as a part of it. So anyway, I find that funny that they have adopted a phrase. I'm like, all right,
But they don't
I
use
used to try and
privacy.
get them to say privacy
Yeah,
enhancing.
they don't say privacy enhancing.
Yeah, I actually use privacy enhancing technology is is a good term for for the whole space of privacy enhancing technology.
You touched briefly on Tornado Cash, and it was one of the questions that that arose, I think, during your talk. What is the situation with Tornado Cash? Obviously the prospect that somebody who writes software that can be used, for something like Tornado Cash, that's something that's popped up on our radar, and we're kind of a little bit wary of how that goes. Where do you guys see this, situation going with that? And what do you think are the potential implications?
So the one bad outcome that can happen from any kind of event like that is the chilling effect that occurs for people who are like, wait, why should I volunteer my time to contribute to an open source project where I'm trying to make this thing better by giving up, often without any compensation, and then by doing so, I might be held liable if somebody else misuses this technology. Because many technologies can be used for good, they can be used for bad, and it's actually really hard to make a technology that can never be used for anything bad. And that, I hope, is not the message that everybody gets, but that's the message I fear. And I think that, maybe given how the Netherlands reacted to it by arresting a contributor, a major contributor to the project, that may not be a great jurisdiction to work on privacy-enhancing technologies, which I think would be a sad thing for the Netherlands to become sort of a pariah there. But nevertheless, that sends a bad message. And I think the message that we want to be sending is that, it is a good thing to contribute to open source projects. We appreciate people who are doing that, and we're not going to put them on the hook for every possible outcome that can come from open source software. But there's some pushback. I mean, one of the proposals running around in Europe and has been alluded to in the Biden administration's cybersecurity strategy is imposing liability on software makers if they fail to have good security. And I get it, right, that we want to have better security. So one tool in the policymakers' toolbox is to say, well, if you don't do it, then you're held liable for what happens. But this can also have a terrible chilling effect on people wanting to contribute to these projects. With the U.S. policy on this, from the Biden paper on it, saying, but we're going to have an exception for open source software that provides components to other projects, which I think they thought was some sort of useful middle ground. And sure, if you make work on OpenSSL and somebody uses OpenSSL in their project, you're protected by this policy. But there are a lot of open source things which are themselves a thing that you can download and use and are not a component of something else, and they're also valuable for our society. So I would like to get more in the eyes of policymakers that we need to have thriving open source ecosystems and to make the policy space in which they can thrive. And I think that is entirely possible because the story of open source is a good story. It has provided so many useful things for society, and I hope that by just educating and letting people know and getting the sympathetic stories of people who are giving their all to make the world better through open source as a story of people we want to help thrive and not put any chilling barriers in the way.
So much benefit has come from open source and open technologies in the United States that you think it would be a no-brainer. But Paul, what's your view on the whole Tornado Cash thing?
Yeah, well, I think it has fueled these movements towards these reporting acts like the Financial Technology Protection Act of 2023 and the National Defense Authorization Act, an amendment made to the NDAA asking for reports from Treasury on different ways of using cryptocurrency through mixers or through other techniques and privacy-enhancing techniques for illicit finance. So I think that's a continuation of that. And as I mentioned in my talk, I'm very concerned about those because I'm afraid that those reports could be very one-sided and could lead to recommendations that eventually could be put into future legislation. So I think I've got to watch that very, very closely. And as an industry, we've got to really be in tune with where those go going forward, because those actually do have a very good chance of becoming law. I mean, I think they will be, is my guess. So those are something that I think is a direct result and just a continuation of that. I'm very happy. I mean, Coin Center with their work, they're just priceless. I mean, they're such an amazing defender of the industry, and the suit that they have with OFAC, I'm very hopeful for that. I think that that summary judgment filing is important. Again, it could take a long time, but it would be so good, and I am optimistic to get like a good ruling on Tornado Cash. I think that will be a game changer, just like this Ripple ruling has been. And that's what we need. That's what we desperately need to help set things straight again, is for some really good court decisions that will show that privacy can be protected in crypto.
Yeah, so to add on to that is that we've talked a lot about the state of legislation, regulation, and policy, but I also want to give a shout out to the value of working with the court systems, because that is the mechanism in many jurisdictions, and certainly in the United States, for ensuring that legislations and regulations are within the Constitution and having a backstop, because there's really nothing literal preventing a legislature from passing a law that is unconstitutional. And then to rectify that, go to the courts, and you can also, elsewhere in the world, you're going to go to the human rights treaties and other things to say, well, this violates the right to privacy that's enshrined in this treaty, and therefore it's not valid. That is an important tool in the policy toolbox, and in many countries where they have strong respect for the rule of law and have a good court system, it allows that some of these decisions that may have come about from a reaction to like a big newsworthy event that causes them, well, we have to do something, as we were talking about earlier, is that a judge can sort of more calmly look at it. You can make arguments about okay, here's how it's going to affect these other rights. This is how it's going to upend some things that we hold dear, and then get a response that allows the policymakers to say, well, I did my bit and I passed this law, and then the judges can do, well, I did my bit and made sure it didn't go into law. And this is a way in which our rights can be preserved in a society where there is going to be legislative reactions that are maybe overblown.
Let's start with you, Paul, on this one. We'll kind of start to wrap it up. What do you think is going to happen over the next 12 months? I know there's obviously a range of possibilities, but let's get some predictions down. And it may be that there isn't a huge amount of progress, but what do you think will happen over the coming 12 months? What direction do you think the whole regulatory policy space is going to move in? And will it be good or bad for Zcash?
We're getting very close, at least in the U.S., to an election cycle, and that means we're going to see very little movement of much of anything, except for what is already in process and is starting to move. So that's some of the things I already discussed in my talk. So I think we're just going to go into a period of possibly continued regulatory activity, possibly more cases that are coming out of courts with some type of resolution through some of these maybe early judgments that would help, possibly help. But there's a very good chance, I hate to say it, but there's a you always have to expect in crypto, there's a very good chance there's going to be another event. I don't know what that event is going to be, but I think there's a very good chance. I hate to have to say that because I feel like I'm jinxing us, but I just pray that doesn't happen because I don't think we're in a good position to withstand another systematic failure in crypto. We know that, or at least there's been many rumors, well-reported rumors of DOJ preparing something very powerful against Binance. That could be an issue. I'm just hopeful that doesn't happen. If that doesn't, I'm generally optimistic. I think that the politics potentially could shift in the U.S. We've got progress that we've made in getting some of these bills we've discussed. They can be taken back, put in through the grinder again, and see what we come up with on the next Congress, next administration. So, yeah, so that'll be a while. It'll be a while. But this is a very long game. It's something that I don't think people appreciate in policy. Like what I was saying earlier about my position and having been in policy for a long time, it has helped me immensely because I know what works and what doesn't. And it's all the relationships you build over decades. It's required. And I would like it not to be, but that's just the way the political system in the U.S. works. So, yeah, just got to be prepared. Be prepared to fight for a very long time.
Well, I think the future is not yet written. Right? That's we got to make this future and write it and try to get to that better policy land. And yeah, I mean certainly there could be a big event that will make that more challenging. There also may be some events that will showcase the utility of blockchain technology. Could make it easier. I think where we'll probably see some more movement is likely outside the United States. I agree that there's some Congress. It's hard to get anything done, and then as election season comes up, there are far other things to do. But in the EU, they have been looking at some ways to regularize cryptocurrencies, and some of those may be ones that add some legitimacy and will be doable. Some of them are more suspicious of, there's a work to be done there. And then elsewhere as well, there are a number of other jurisdictions that are, some are trying to be crypto friendly and create a good regulatory environment. They are also, of course, concerned. They don't want to have the big scandal, which may look bad. I think Bahamas got a little bit feeling bad after FTX. But I think I try to be an optimist. The optimism, as I said, as if we work hard, if we try and push for these policies, we can try and win those hearts and minds. And also try to make use cases. When talking to policymakers, it's stories that you tell them about, a story about how this is good. And so making a story that makes sense, I'm this is a good thing in the world, something that we want to achieve, that's what makes people want to say, okay, and I want to support that technology, and it's got to be a good story that's wow, that really should happen, or that the person should have been protected from that, we want to do this sort of thing. And that, we hope to find those stories, highlight them, and do what we can to ease the creation of good stories.
Because there's always going to be those bad stories that are coming from from the law enforcement and the sort of surveillance capitalism folks. They seem to have a real heavy influence on some of these bills that are going through in terms of who's going to be on these committees that are formulating these reports and so on. Yeah, that's great advice. Well, listen, we're just about out of time. We're about to go into a half-hour-long afternoon break, but we will be back here at the bottom of the hour at 3:30 local time with Zuko talking about the future of Zcash, decentralization, and sustainability. So please join us for that. But for now, Paul, Kurt, thank you very much to you both.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.